As 2024 comes to an end, we reflect on South Africa's groundbreaking case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, which some say could mark a historic first if granted next year. Since filing the case, South Africa has approached the court on 4 occasions, urgently requesting interim measures to halt or stop Israel's ongoing attacks on the occupied Palestinian territories. Now, the legal action underscores South Africa's commitment to international justice and highlights the escalating global concerns over the humanitarian crisis happening in Gaza. Let's now reflect on this historic moment as it made headlines in 2024. DIRCO's Director General, Zane Dango, joins us this morning for this. Zane, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it as well for joining us here on Newzroom Afrika. The difficulty, I suppose, in all of this is that South Africa does this, the international community then kind of needs to join in as well in some ways. But South Africa deciding indeed to stand firm on its principles here.
Good morning, Arabella. Yes, I mean, this is, it's groundbreaking, as you said in your introductory remarks, because it's the very first time that a country which is relatively powerful, aligned with the West, has been taken to the International Court of Justice for the crime of crimes, which is genocide. Normally these kinds of genocide cases are essentially where some Western countries bring other Western countries to book, or in most cases, they bring countries from the developing South to book. This is groundbreaking in the sense that a country from Africa, from South Africa, taking a powerful country to court and successfully presenting a case which Israel had to answer for. And I think this is what makes it so unique. It's that it also challenges the power contours of international justice.
They say that the wheels of justice, though, turn slowly, but they do turn. This could still take some time. I mean, the filing by Israel needs to still happen by the middle of next year, and then the ruling after that. If it doesn't go in favor, or perhaps Israel doesn't necessarily adhere to what the ICJ has put forward, as they haven't done thus far, what next?
Yeah, genocide cases before the ICJ are notoriously slow. That's why we went to the court 4 times for provisional orders, because what we didn't want to do is just present a legal case. Our case is a genocide case, but the genocide isn't something that has happened in the past. It's happening as we speak. At the time when we filed the application, the attacks were acute, but we can see that even with the 4 very specific rulings from the ICJ, Israel ignored those rulings. They ignored Security Council resolutions. And you can see that vast parts of particularly North Gaza no longer exist. So you can see that this case is important because it hopes to bring Israel to book, but it's also bringing to the fore the fact that international justice is in peril if it is not applied equally. So we are going to see Israel submitting its response to South Africa's memorial, which we filed in October. They have 6 months to do so. But we are hoping that, given the fact that this is not like many other genocides, something that took place in the past, it's unfolding, that the court would see some urgency in bringing the oral testimonies of the 2 competing parties closer, so that we can find a way of actually ending this. The reason why we brought this is, of course, our obligations under the Genocide Convention, but also to stop the mass slaughter as we saw it unfolding.
Yeah, what do you say, though, to those that may ask about those genocides, and some of them perhaps still being seen as happening actually in our own continent, and South Africa not necessarily playing a significant role in those as we are with regards to Israel? How would we respond to the world community about this?
So we got to put all of this in context. So let's look at where there is another potential genocide taking place, and that is in Sudan. And there's already an open case before the International Criminal Court, which we support. We've basically said that we support the investigations by the International Criminal Court into the crime of genocide in Sudan. The ICJ doesn't play a part in this because it's not two states. It's essentially a civil war, and there's various kinds of genocides in the world. If you look at historically, you've got what we call internal genocides like Rwanda, what we're seeing in Sudan, but we've also had over the years genocides that were essentially, if you look at the textbooks and the literature, settler colonial genocides. And this is one element of those. I mean, this is a modern day settler colonial genocide. And this what makes it unique. If you had the kind of technology available to us when the Native Americans were slaughtered, or the Aboriginal people in Australia, or the tens of millions of people that were killed in the Congo by the Belgians. This is the kind of violence you would have been seeing. The kind of violence you see in Gaza, in Palestine, is the kind of violence you would have been seeing. So, of course, we take a very keen interest in what's happening in Africa, and we will be working with others to bring not only an end to that violence, but also bring those responsible for international crimes to justice. But this is particularly important in the sense that it's a modern day settler colonial genocide. And the level of impunity that accompanies that has historically been high. And this is why Israel has enjoyed what we call institutional impunity, which is why this case is important and has been categorized as one of the most important in the history of international law.
I would be remiss, Zane, if I didn't then actually ask you, if you'll allow me to, about Mozambique at this stage as well. It's a situation that, of course, affects not just ourselves. We've been speaking to the spokesperson for the Kingdom of Eswatini as well, and a situation like that could be very difficult for Southern Africa and the rest of the continent. What are the methods that we can move forward on when it comes to it?
So, as you may have picked up in the sort of reports of the last couple of weeks, South Africa is working with the government of Mozambique, but also, our special envoys and others will be working with some of the other role players in Mozambique and the region to bring the kind of violence and instability in Mozambique, hopefully to an end quite soon. The kind of violence that we're seeing in Mozambique that is linked to election outcomes is not unique, and we're seeing this happening in many, many parts of the world, including, for example, Eastern Europe. We've seen what's happened in places like Georgia recently, where the outcomes of elections are disputed, and instead of engaging with these outcomes through the constitutional means and the institutions of governance set up to deal with that, there's a tendency to resort to violence. And we are hoping that, South Africa playing a leading role with the envoys that the president has deployed, but also working with other stakeholders, that we can bring some kind of stability through discussions and negotiations between the antagonists in Mozambique. Because what we cannot afford in South Africa, particularly by the region, is a Mozambique imploding and the region being brought into more instability. Our own borders will be under pressure, and we don't want that kind of instability that will last for 5 or 10 years. And the sooner we bring this to an end, the better.
Yeah. Has South Africa perhaps, maybe neglected is the wrong word here, but not necessarily fulfilled completely its leadership role within the continent, considering its industrialized nature, the strength of its institutions and the like as well, in perhaps not helping to drive exactly what we're doing on the international stage when it comes to this ICJ case as well, in the rest of the continent, particularly in Southern Africa, in situations that may be perhaps lacking in justice or perhaps not helpful to citizens. Should South Africa be playing a greater role, you think, or are we sufficiently doing that at present?
Look, I think some of these kind of incidents are unexpected. We know we've been working in Mozambique on what's been happening in Cabo Delgado. We've deployed, troops, mostly South African troops, even though it's a SADC deployment. to deal with the insurgency and the instability that came from that part of Mozambique. The kinds of reactions to the elections was one that was perhaps not anticipated. I do think that we need to play the role as a major player in SADC. We need to ensure that we work with our partners in the region around what constitutes good governance, the importance of good governance, because a lot of the root causes of conflicts stem from, poor governance and people feeling neglected. So I do think that in the next few years, we're going to have to pay a lot more focus on how do we engage around institutional stability in the region, but with a focus on good governance.
Yeah, is that happening though, or perhaps this weakness that might actually be in place, is that happening because of what feels like greater protectionism globally? Because it feels as though a lot more nations are rather focusing inward as opposed to finding the right kind of communication, assistance, aid, global aptitude as well, to their partners, to countries that they've traded with, etc. as well. Is protectionism creating a much more difficult situation here?
I'm not sure if it's only protectionism. I do think we're going to have to, as you know, we're chairing the G20 this year. We're going to have to look at what are the kinds of economic policies, social issues that are giving rise to the kind of discontent that we're seeing, that there is a challenge to what is called establishment politics. I think there's a discontent with the fact that you may have a form of global economics where the vast number of working class and middle class people feel isolated, and many begin to question the value of democracies. And you do see populist leaders coming to the fore, and populist leaders winning those elections. So winning the elections is one thing, but then also contesting these elections if they are lost. We've seen this in the US in the previous election, for example. So I do think that it's not just protectionism. We have to look at what it is that's giving rise to this high level of discontent with democracy, global politics. And if protectionism is one of those, we have to look at that. But we may also have to look at the kind of economic policies globally that may be giving rise to high levels of inequality and exclusion, where people were finding that they may be questioning the institutions that give rise to and